Welcome to the Training for Translators podcast.
Do better work, earn more money, and enjoy your job with our weekly episodes for ambitious freelance translators and interpreters.
Visit our website at trainingfortranslators.com to subscribe to our newsletter, learn more about our upcoming classes, or read blog post versions of our podcast.
Now here's your host, Corinne McKay.
Greetings, Training for Translators listeners. This is Corinne McKay with episode 8 of the Training for Translators podcast, Is Translation a Dying Profession? Now, this podcast episode is based on a post that I wrote for my blog in May of 2023, and that post has the same title, Is Translation a Dying Profession? If you'd like to read it. And then 2 posts that I recently put on LinkedIn. And if you and I are not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connection request. But I believe those posts are public, so if you just search for me, Corinne McKay, on LinkedIn, you will find them. So first, let me take a look back at the posts that I wrote in 2023, and then we will talk a little bit about how things have changed. So what I said at that time was, in response to a reader, actually, who asked me, is translation a dying profession? I answered, good question. Short answer, in my opinion, no, but I also understand why people ask that question. Then I went on to a longer answer in which I included 3 data points, and I believe that all 3 of these are still true. Number 1, people have been predicting the imminent demise of the translation profession. And I should say here, in this whole episode, I am really just talking about written translation. I think talking about spoken interpreting would kind of demand its own episode because the factors affecting translation and interpreting are really different. I do feel that since 2020, interpreting has been pretty disrupted as well, in the sense that the transition to remote interpreting, which had been predicted for, years to decades, then kind of happened in the space of like 6 months. And when you talk about a polarizing development, oh my gosh, remote interpreting is a polarizing development if there ever was one. And in my experience, remote interpreting has not so much pushed down rates. Feel free to disagree with me on this, but it has not so much pushed down rates as it has radically changed working conditions for interpreters. So personally, I would not have much of a conference interpreting job if it were not for remote interpreting, because there is little to almost no French conference interpreting work where I live, and I really am not interested in the logistics of changing that. I don't really want to move to a major city, and I don't really want to live in hotels 200 days a year. At the same time, you will talk to interpreters who say exactly the opposite, who hate remote interpreting, who feel that the essence of the job is being there in the room with the clients, who find, bad audio to be a constant problem in remote interpreting, which is, kind of true. But I digress. That's another episode. In this episode, we are talking just about written translation. So number 1, this imminent demise stuff. I am 53 years old now. I graduated from undergrad in 1993. So for those from outside the US, that's the first 4 years of college or university where you get your bachelor's degree. I graduated from that in 1993, and a professor told me then, forget about getting into translation because it's all being taken over by computers. And yet, here I am, 31 years later, happily doing this job. So I think that machine translation and AI have changed, are changing, will continue to change our profession. But I do not think that there is going to be, wholesale replacement of translators within the working lifetimes of those of us active in the profession today. But at the same time, a lot has changed in the, let's say, 15, 16 months since I wrote this post. We'll talk about that later. Number 2, I am now in the position of having a college university student daughter. And if she or one of her friends wanted to become a translator or interpreter, I would actually feel quite positive about that. And I would have no problem paying for her education to do that job. In fact, my daughter has a friend from high school who grew up bilingual in Japanese, and she is now doing a Japanese literature master's degree. And every time I see her, I tell her, hey, when you have to figure out how to make money with that degree, come talk to me, because that's what happened to all the rest of us, language nerds who then confronted, the career world. So number two, I would encourage any 20 something and even my own child to become a translator or interpreter. And number three, I have been a freelancer for more than 20 years. And I am not dissatisfied with my income. In 2023, I earned the most I ever made as a freelancer, and this year is going to be slightly less because I worked less on purpose, but my income has really not been affected by AI and MT. Now let's move on to the but and factors. Here are a few things that I think have really changed, and I'm going to supplement this with these LinkedIn posts that I recently wrote. I think one enormous difference is that when I started freelancing in 2002, there was sort of an entry level path in which one could earn what I would consider a pretty decent living working for big agencies. So I feel like back at that time in the early 2000s, most people started working for large agencies that based their hiring primarily on their own tests, and so thus had a pretty low barrier to entry. And my recollection is that I did some amount of work for those big agencies in the early 2000s. And if I'm not mistaken, that was paid about 10 to 12 cents a word for French to English. And I knew Spanish translators even who made like 9 to 10 cents a word. Whereas my sense is that those rates have now gone down by 50% or even more. It would not surprise me if they had gone down a lot more for languages like English into Spanish, English into Russian, Portuguese, Greek, etc. And I think the thing to me that has changed about that is I am not really sure how people survive financially on those rates unless either their cost of living is really, really low, or they depend very heavily on a spouse or partner's income or another job. So if I had had to start out as a French to English translator making, 5 cents a word for the type of client that was likely to hire an entry-level person, I'm not sure how I would have survived financially. Second, I think that the amount of work it takes to launch a freelance translation business has exponentially increased in recent decades. And I think this phenomenon has honestly been happening since like the 1980s. So, for example, when I talk to translators who started out in the 80s or 90s, many of them say something like, I started out with a phone number and an AOL email address. And within 8 months, with what a, quote unquote, modern freelancer would think of as pretty minimal marketing, these people had so much work that they had to hire another translator to work with them. I've talked to multiple freelancers who told me that. Like, I started out in 1988, just sort of spreading the word and hanging out my shingle. And in, 6 months, I had so much work that I had to hire someone else to work with me. So I think another thing that has really changed is the ratio of marketing to actual paid work that you have to do in the first few years of your business. And I think that the same is true of people who are now, due to recent changes, looking to transition from the agency market to the direct client market. Another shift in the agency market that I think I have seen, let's say over about the past 10 years, is agency rates in general have gone down. I feel like there is less of a distinction between those, what you might have called mass market agencies and boutique agencies, which thus creates a real crunch in the quote unquote good agency market. So one thing that I can say in the 16 months since I wrote this post is that I think most agencies have transitioned for any project that lends itself to machine translation, that they are sort of assuming that what their clients prefer is the faster, cheaper model of machine translation with a human editor. I think that has been a massive shift. If we think that the demo version of ChatGPT came out almost exactly 2 years ago, I believe it was November of 2022, when that came out, that we have seen this massive migration of high volume agency work to machine translation with a human editor. So I think that this, crunch in the quote unquote good agency market is even more pronounced now. That if translators still have agency clients who are paying a solid per word rate for what you might call pure translation, starting from scratch, not from a machine translation, translators are likely to hold on to those clients as long as they can, which means that those, quote unquote premium market agencies do exist, but they are rarely going to be recruiting because most translators who work for them are not leaving. Another observation, it takes a lot of hustle to find direct clients. One thing that I'll talk about in the second half of the show, one thing I think we are realizing is that there are a lot of freelance translators who just know from the get-go that they are not that interested in working for direct clients because of all the other things that you have to do, namely find clients. Like, I talk to many, many freelance translators who say, I just am not that interested in working with direct clients because I don't want to be a salesperson and a project manager. I don't want to have to find and pay my own editor. And I think secondarily, even more freelance translators, even if they have the desire to work with direct clients, even more just simply do not stick with direct client marketing long enough to see any results. And I think that the end result to me is that I personally could not meet my financial goals if I only translated only for agencies these days. So as I talked about in last week's episode, if you didn't get a chance to listen to that, that was episode 7, some thoughts on freelance income. And I mentioned in there that according to various compensation surveys, the average US-based freelance translator earns around $55,000 to $60,000 US dollars a year. And I think that when you deduct self-employment tax, benefits, professional development, buying your own computer, taking some vacation, that is roughly the equivalent of a salary job paying in the $40,000, which for me is not something that would meet my financial goals. And the truth is that if you are working as much as you can or as much as you want to, the only way to increase your income is to find higher paying clients that are likely to be direct clients. So when we talk about this whole idea of, is translation a dying profession? I would answer absolutely not. Something I'll talk about in the second half of the show is how I personally have actually found multiple good new translation clients lately. But the part of the market that I think gives rise to this idea of dying is people who cruised along for years to decades making, let's say, 10 to 14, 15 cents per word from agencies that sent them tons of work, who just said, as soon as you're done with that 10,000 words, we have another 10,000 words for you. And that is the part of the market that I think is really, really different from when I started out, particularly. Okay, in the second half of the show, we are going to move on to 2 LinkedIn posts I recently wrote. But first, let's pause for a brief message from Training for Translators. If you enjoy the Training for Translators podcast, you need to read my friend and colleague Eve Lindemuth-Baudoux's book, Maintaining Your Second Language. We all know that there is tons of information out there for beginning and intermediate language learners, but it is actually really hard to find resources for advanced learners of a second, third, or sixth language, and specifically for translators, interpreters, language teachers, bilingual families, basically everyone who listens to this podcast. Eve's book is full of creative tips on how to incorporate your non-native language or languages into your daily life. And every chapter has a section called Try This, where you get a practical strategy you can try right away. Best of all, these activities are fun. As someone who grew up on verb conjugation flashcards, I was thrilled to find suggestions like pick a TV series in your non-native language, watch it, and then join an online forum like a subreddit where you can discuss the show. Learn and practice tongue twisters in your non-native language. Keep a journal in your non-native language. Write your to-do and shopping lists in your non-native language. Eve herself is the mom of 2 fully bilingual children who were raised primarily in the US but are often assumed to be native speakers when they go to France. So she really is the authority on language acquisition. If you are like me and you live in your target language country and you don't have a lot of opportunities to practice your non-native language or languages, you need this book. Maintaining Your Second Language. Pick it up wherever books are sold. Welcome back. And in the second half of this episode, I'd like to talk about these 2 LinkedIn posts that I recently wrote. And are we dying now? No, we're not dying now. But here are some updated thoughts in the year plus since I wrote that original blog post. Number 1, I think it has become pretty typical to talk to translators, and again, I'm talking about written translation, not interpreting, who now say, as I said in the first half, I cruised along for years to decades. I made, let's say, 10 to 14 cents a word translating for agencies. They sent me basically as much work as I could handle. And in the space of the last 2 years, most of them have switched to machine translation with post-editing, for which maybe they're offering like $25 to $30 an hour. So even if someone in that situation wanted to edit 40 hours a week, which is pretty grueling, most people don't want to do that, that would mean an income drop of more than 50%. And Corinne, am going to theorize that many or even the majority of those established freelance translators really have no interest in working with direct clients because, as I said before, what they want to do is translate, not find clients, not be a translation salesperson, not be a project manager. And to be honest, I am an eternal optimist to a fault, but I do think that many freelancers in those categories are going to end up leaving translation and pursuing a completely different line of work or doing translation part-time / very part-time and combining it with something else. I will say that this year, this was my 20th consecutive American Translators Association conference, ATA 65, in Portland, Oregon, about 2 weeks ago. And it seemed to me that people there were doing really pretty well or pretty horribly without a whole lot in between. This is the first ATA conference I've ever attended where I met a significant number of people who said, I have found another job that has nothing to do with translation to supplement my income. I'm walking dogs. I'm working at a restaurant. Things like that. And I honestly think that for translators who don't either have the desire or the skills to work with direct clients, that trend will continue. Now, it's not all doom and gloom because by contrast, most translators I know who were pretty well established in the direct client market when AI fever hit are doing fine, even way better than fine. I think I talked to a good handful of people at the ATA conference who are doing translation or translation adjacent services. So maybe they're doing specialized copywriting, multilingual SEO, things like that, but things using the same skills that they always had, who are in that position of hiring people to work with them, outsourcing work to other people, because they are working for clients who don't really care how the translation is done as long as the translation is done well. Their clients care about quality, specialized knowledge, confidentiality, personal relationship, and having one point of contact who understands their business and their needs. I will say in my own case, and I'm going to talk about this more in the wrap up of this episode, my own translation direct clients are honestly much more likely to ask, "You don't use AI tools, do you?" Because they don't want their stuff uploaded to a cloud server. And yes, I do know that there are confidential ways to do machine translation. You will hear people often say, "Do you use online banking? Do you use online medical records?" Because those things are, perhaps way more confidential than the things you translate. And most of us use online services for those. But I'm just saying, this is what clients ask me. Another interesting data point. Anecdotally, I have not yet met a translator in the direct client market who says that their actual translation work has been significantly aided or improved by AI or machine translation. Now, here, I am not saying that people don't use AI in other ways, which I actually think is a good idea. Idea generation, getting ChatGPT to tell you what are the biggest threats facing the solar power sector, getting ChatGPT to write blog post headlines for you, things like that, give you suggestions for that stuff, or how to simplify language, how to make it easier to understand. But in my experience, I really have yet to talk to a translator in the direct client market who says hey, I'm, making bank running it all through DeepL and giving it a light edit and my clients don't even notice. I don't think that that is a thing. So to me, the name of the game is adapting. The world changes. Like I always say, 1988 was a great year, but it's not 1988 anymore. And adapting does not mean going along with trends that you disagree with, that you despise. It means that if you keep doing what you've always done, you have to expect that you're going to get what you've always gotten. You're going to get the same results as you've always gotten. Moving on to the final segment of today's show, another LinkedIn observation I offered was that I have recently gotten a couple of new good translation direct clients. And in all of those cases, the client said some version of this to me. I know that we could get this cheaper. We could use ChatGPT. We could click on a Google ad for an agency, but as they put it, we can't trust this project to just anybody. And they gave various reasons for that. One told me it's highly confidential and we want to know who is seeing and working on the document. One told me we poured our heart and soul into writing this document, and it's important to us to have it translated by someone who cares. Another said, our writers say that AI is a really helpful tool for idea generation, but that its writing style has, frankly, no style whatsoever. And we would assume it's the similar for translation, that translation is going to come out sounding kind of flat and robotic if it's done by an AI tool. So when I talk about who is doing well right now, I really think it is largely freelancers with diverse businesses working for clients who care. So just like this client said to me, we want the translation done by someone who cares. You too want to be working for clients who care. So my question to leave you with would be, how can you find or at least be on the lookout for clients with that attitude? We can't trust this project to just anyone. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode 8 of the Training for Translators podcast. The podcast is hosted by me, Corinne McKay. My website is trainingfortranslators.com, where you can read over 1,000 blog posts for free. If you have feedback, you can post a comment on the blog post version of this episode at trainingfortranslators.com. You can email me at classes@trainingfortranslators.com. podcast.com. The show's intro and outro were recorded and created by Shadow Studio. I record the episodes on Audacity using a Shure MV7 Plus microphone. The podcast is technologically hosted on Libsyn. Thanks very much, and I hope to talk to you in a future episode.
Thanks for listening to the Training for Translators podcast, helping you do better work, earn more money, and enjoy your job.
To leave a comment, learn more about our upcoming classes, or read blog post versions of our podcast, visit our website at trainingfortranslators.com.
If you enjoy the Training for Translators podcast, please tell your colleagues and friends about it and leave us a review in your favorite podcast app.